Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast.
Welcome to the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. I am Tom Ricks, and this is the next chapter in a series called Mommeries, the autobiography of Josie Bergen Lawson, who happens to be my mother. When we last ended the last series we did, we had basically wrapped up more or less Casper, Wyoming. But before we talk about further, there was an issue-specific version of the podcast that we had discussed doing, where you could talk about your experience with the Right to Life organization.
Yeah, well, it was more than Right to Life. It was also Phyllis Schlafly's Eagle Forum and things
Eagle
like
Forum.
that. Yeah. It started in the late 70s when they had it was the International Women's Conference, I think it was, in Houston. And it was kind of crazy. So, I watched some of it on TV and got all riled up and decided to get involved. There was, at the same time, Phil had her, quote, alternative, end quote, big conference in Houston as well. So both were going on at this.
And just to clarify, for those who don't know who Phyllis Schlafly is, she's basically the founder of several conservative organizations designed to fight
pretty much to fight everything
abortion,
left of Hitler.
Abortion and reverse.
She was a very intelligent woman.
Correct.
Who, close to my age, I think, put herself through law school to become a lawyer when all of this was going on in the 70s. And it was complete reaction to the women's movement in the 70s.
And if I recall correctly...
God forbid women...
Sorry, go ahead.
God forbid women should want to be anything other than housewives.
Now, if I recall correctly, you got like an award from her, did you not?
I did. We'll get to that eventually. That's after we moved to Wyoming. But this is in Houston.
Yeah, the main reason I asked about...
So I attended...
Sorry, the main reason I wanted to ask to explain who she was is a lot of people might not, who aren't like political junkies, might not have this like...
Sure. She died a few years ago, and Kate Blanchett, I believe, starred in a movie about her. I think it was a made-for-Netflix movie or something about Phyllis Schlafly. And some people were offended, but I think people need to know who she was, because my favorite quote about her was a friend of mine when I was a volunteer women's clinic escort, abortion clinic escort in Atlanta. Her comment was, I always thought of Phyllis Schlafly as that woman who flew around the country telling women to stay home. That pretty much sums up Phyllis Schlafly.
Spoilers, by the way, for future future efforts. Magic mirrors, but we'll get to that anyway. The point, magic mirrors. When you were a clinic, the Michelle with the mirror.
Oh, that's a whole
I
other
know.
thing.
We won't talk about.
I
was just making an in joke for myself, which I'll probably cut out later. Anyway.
Yeah, that's funny. Yes, the mirror thing is funny, and we'll get to that eventually. But for right now, when we were living in Houston, and I watched the women's conference it was on PBS and NPR. They were broadcasting the whole thing, and I was kind of being naive and a religious political conservative at the time. I was shocked, I tell you, shocked. So I went to the Phyllis Schlafly conference. I don't remember much about it. But when I came home, your father had been watching the women's conference, the International Women's Conference, and he was upset by what he saw, because up to that point he was like, what are you doing? You don't need to be doing this stuff. This is, annoying. You should be here fixing my dinner and stuff. And but when I got home, he had been watching it, and he said, I think you need to be involved in this. So from that point, I became a conservative religious political activist. That was shortly before we moved to Casper, Wyoming, and that's where I became really involved. And your father and I formed an organization called the Wyoming Family Rights Forum, and I spent a lot of time driving to Laramie in the snow.
Laramie is the state capital, is it
Blizzard
not?
Conditions. Yeah, and very, very boring. Wyoming is not a pretty state.
No, I
just
like
isn't.
to.
You know,
I like to say to people that if you basically imagine how gorgeous the Yellowstone or the Tetons are, it basically sucked up all the nice parts of the rest of the state into.
Pretty much, yeah. It's an ugly, ugly, dismal place. And I really hated living there. I had a few friends there that I loved, but I really hated living there. And I got told all the freaking time that basically that you're not allowed to talk because you're an outsider. You're not from Wyoming, so shut up.
I'm sorry.
I've been told to shut up most of my life,
I didn't
and
know
it's like, it's never worked. Don't tell me to shut up. It doesn't work.
I didn't realize that was a rule. Do we need to skip this part about Wyoming and get to the next part about Colorado? If we're both outsiders, then...
What?
Well, I mean, if it's a rule that we're...
Oh.
Anyway,
so, yeah, Wyoming's a weird place. That's the place where, I think it was the, was it the 100th anniversary of the, Mormon trek, to Utah. They had a
I remember
big
that.
celebration. I don't remember. Yeah, it had to be.
Yeah, it was a
100th,
reenactment, like the marathon
It was 100th or 150th. Yeah, they had a relay race across the country. They carried runners carried a torch, and they'd hand it off to another person after so much. And your Uncle Donald signed up for the portion of the race that was in Wyoming. So your dad's parents and I think younger siblings came to Roseanne, I guess, came to Casper to, I guess, follow him and pick him up because he'd be finishing out in everything in Wyoming is in the Tules. Mm-hmm. It really is. That's all there is Tules. You know, you have Casper, which is very small, and then you have Laramie, which is also small.
Do you mean Cheyenne, by the way?
But,
Isn't Cheyenne actually the capital of Wyoming?
I don't remember.
It's okay.
I don't care.
That's a great point.
I hate Wyoming. Okay. But Laramie was where I was going to. I'm pretty sure Laramie was where I was going for these to talk to legislators. I was constantly going and making appointment with my state legislators to talk about various bills and oppose bills and push bills and, fight abortion. And I had a legislator tell me, we've gotten to where, it was the ERA. I was trying to get the ERA rescinded because the ratification, Wyoming had ratified the ERA. They're very proud. They call themselves the Equality State because they were the first state to give women the right to vote. But that was a game that some states were playing because Utah would have been the first, but their legislature met it in such a way that they weren't able to meet before Wyoming passed theirs. So there was this race to become the first because it was inevitable that women were going to get the right to vote. So because of that, they ratified the ERA. And I worked really hard to try to rescind Wyoming's ratification of the ERA. And I went around the state giving lectures with your father supporting me. He was very proud of me and very supportive, and he did a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff, and I was the face of the whole thing. And, we came close to doing it. We came really close to doing it. It was a very, very narrow, and we almost succeeded in rescinding the vote. And for that, I ended up going to a conference in, where was Phyllis Schlafly from? Illinois? I can't remember where, but I think she was from Illinois. And so we had a conference, and I received an Eagle Forum Award.
Missouri.
And
she was from Missouri.
It was in Missouri? Okay. She, shook my hand and handed me this award, and, blah, blah, blah. And, of course, after I grew up a little bit, I didn't care anymore, and I gave the award to you, so you have it. So, but yeah, I traveled around the state talking about various issues, and I tried to be rational about it. I mean, at the time, every time you heard about the ERA, you were hearing about all the bathrooms would become unisex. That was the big thing that the right was always screaming about, which drove me crazy because it was a stupid non-issue. And, when I traveled around talking about things, I talked about what to me were real issues. And the scariest experience I had, I can't remember what tiny town it was we went to, because we traveled all over the state, but we went to some tiny town where we invited to talk to a women's rights group, a liberal group. And, they asked questions and I answered them, and I poo-pooed things like, unisex bathrooms and so on, and talked about women in the military and women on the battlefield and all that kind of thing. It was one of the most gratifying experiences I had, because when I was done, I had all these women coming up to me and saying, well, I still don't agree with you, but at least I understand why you feel the way you do, which is a huge coup, really. They didn't yell at me or treat me like I was crazy or, anything. They listened to me very respectfully and came to the conclusion, okay, you have valid reasons for feeling the way you do. I disagree, but you have valid reasons, which was nice. It said something about my abilities as a human being and as a spokesperson for the cause. I didn't finish talking about Uncle Donald in this race. We got lost. We were driving around in the Tules in Wyoming. I don't even know where.
I know, I remember that. Well, I mean, I don't remember if I was with you when you got lost, but I distinctly remember being on the drive to do all that stuff, so yeah.
Right, it's ranch country. And we stopped to ask directions because we got lost. And a rancher came out and talked to Artel, who was driving, of course, because he always felt like a, quote, kept man, end quote, if Fosha ever drove. Your dad was the same way. Men drive, women hand out food and take care of the children. Anyway. Oh, God. But, yeah, when the guy left, Artel said, that guy had a gun on me the whole time we were talking. I thought, yeah, welcome to Wyoming. I mean, this is a place where they have bucking broncos on their cars. The West is weird. It's just weird in a lot of ways. And they had bumper stickers with bucking, cowboys on bucking broncos saying endangered species. And it always pissed me off because I felt like, how long have white people been in Wyoming? Even as a conservative Mormon, I felt like, really? You're worried about the white culture in Wyoming? Endangered species? I don't think you're the one that's endangered here, because I was well aware of what was going on with Native American tribes across the West and so on. Anyway, and Colorado had the bumper stickers with green and white Rocky Mountains with native, and it's like, really? And if you're not from there, they treat you like you don't matter. You don't count. You're an outsider. So I ran into that constantly. You're not from here. They're no different than Georgia. Georgia, I heard, you're not from around here. So this is the problem with a country that's based on this little piecemeal ice flow states thing, where we have our own little state fiefdoms, and anybody who's not from the state doesn't matter. Of course, they matter if they're white and they move in. That's fine, but I remember one place we went, and all the things I said, she reported the usual stuff that the pro-ERA people said about anti-ERA people, and the issues about she didn't listen to a damn thing I said. Not one thing. Because I presented the same slate of stuff I presented to that women's group, and she just sat there. She'd pre-written the article, as far as I can tell, and didn't hear a word I said, but she commented on how pretty I was. And your father loved that. So... What? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like, okay, whatever. Anyway, let's see, what else? That's the main thing. Oh, one of the guys, one of my representative in Laramie, when I talked to him, it was talking about rescinding the ERA, and he said, oh, we've gotten to where, and this doesn't make sense because you'd have to open them and read them. He said, we don't even read them anymore. We just put them in stacks and we measure the stacks of pro and anti.
Okay.
He said that's what they do.
That sounds like a Wyoming way of handling things.
They are so freaking arrogant, and in spite of the fact that they supposedly ratified the ERA and gave women the right to vote, they're sexist as all get out. It's Dick Cheney and Alan, what's his last name? Alan, the two senators from there. I hated them when I was Mormon. I hated them when I was conservative. I really have always despised Dick Cheney. I learned to hate him in Wyoming. He's a horrible human being. Alan Simpson, that's his name. That's the other guy who was a senator, I think, at the time. Not nice guys, and the state is generally not a nice place. It's not warm and friendly. It's, they're suspicious of outside. It's horrible. It's a horrible place. I was Sister Murdoch and I were really good friends there, and she was really my only close friend there. And we just, we never talked about politics or anything. She was just a good person. So, I seemed to find one or two people who were nice to me after things started to fall apart and have actual friends. So, she's the one that, while I was in Wyoming, I took piano lessons. Did I mention that the last time? I took piano lessons from Sister Murdoch for about a year. And was in a piano recital, which was one of the most terrifying things I've ever done in my entire life. And I immediately quit piano lessons after that because that was straight out of one of my worst nightmares. I mean, I did fine. I played two pieces and I did fine, but it was freaking terrifying. And then I just stopped. So Greg took piano lessons for a little while. We had an old piano that we bought used somewhere, and it turned out it was a refurbished player piano that they took the mechanism out of. That's how old that piano was. It was not in good shape. Anyway, let's see. Then from there we moved back to Houston, and then we were in Houston for, I think, about 9 months, and then we moved to Colorado. Denver, Colorado.
Right. Now, were you still doing any of the Right to Life stuff then? Or, when did you formally end that?
I never formally ended it, but I started having so many problems with the church in Colorado, our ward in Denver, that I gradually pulled away from it. And actually, I think I started to pull away from it all when we were still living in Wyoming. I was having problems there. I don't remember what I mentioned about Julie and Jenny being born there when we lived there.
We went into that quite a bit last episode.
Okay, all right. But I think after Jenny was born, I started to have some issues. It may have been before that. I was having issues with everything and with my relationship with your father. We'd been having problems since about the time Randy was born in 1977. And yeah, so I just gradually fell away from it. And your father started to take everything over. He started to go out and do the lectures and everything, and I just
Now that's
stayed home.
interesting. That's the first I'd ever heard of that. You had mentioned the first time we tried this, and I lost the footage. Although I don't know if you call a podcast footage, but anyway, the point is that you had mentioned that before that he was involved, but that it's the first I heard that he'd actually went around and did lectures. That's interesting.
Yeah, he took over. He took over as the head of the organization in the front of the organization, and I just gave up. I guess when we lost defeating the ERA, I had become so disillusioned and cynical that I started to pull back. But it's also about that time that I was starting to read other stuff. Yeah, that's right. Because the woman who was, I don't know if I mentioned it, the woman who was head of Right to Life in Wyoming, I adored her. I still respect her. She's probably dead by now because she was a chain smoker, seriously addicted to cigarettes. And she was Catholic, but she was the kind of Catholic who had read the papal encyclicals and knew her beliefs on the issue really well, and knew the deep root reasons for her beliefs, which are actually in a lot of ways similar to Mormon beliefs about life and, the Mormon scripture is whatever degree of intelligence you've attained in this life, it will arise with you in the resurrection. Catholics have a similar belief, but theirs, I guess, is from conception. Of course, that's a weird concept too, is all these, zygotes in heaven.
I respectfully
weird.
refrain from commenting on religious beliefs in this particular series.
Right, yeah, but religion is weird. So, but she knew her church's deep beliefs about these issues, and she was very devoted to them, very personally. And brilliant. She was one of the ones that told me, the anti-abortion movement calls for her. She said it's not murder because murder is legal term. She knew the law. She knew the religious dogma. She knew what she was talking about. And she was a genuinely good person, and I still really have a lot of respect for her. But at that time, I had also been going to, I went to the Catholic Church to watch things on video. I watched, I can never remember that guy's name. Wilkie? Is that right? Anyway, he's one of the early guys in the anti-abortion movement. That sounds.
And
he had a series of films out.
When was it? Wendell Wilkie or something like that? I've heard that name before.
That was a candidate for president, I believe.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, I could find it.
So,
I have found it before, just doing a research online. I found it, but whatever his name was, he kind of shocked me. He's the one I've talked about because he shocked me in one of his things on being an anti-abortion activist and how to protest and how to talk about the issue and so on. And he showed, they always had the little models of fetal development, which are always ideal, and pregnancy is rarely ideal. There's no such thing. I mean, it's all highly individual. But whatever his name was, things he said was, when you're talking about development of a baby, you refer to it as a baby and you don't show pictures of the fetus in the first few weeks. His comment was, you don't want to show them something that really shows a baby. So what they were doing, and they always use this, the propaganda always shows perfectly formed near birth or just born, babies. They don't talk about all the anomalies. I was on an abortion discussion group back when they had the net groups in Colorado, and there was a doctor on the biggest one that I was involved with who posted pictures of all the things that go wrong with fetal development. And, you can see where the concept from those pictures, where the concept of women having sex with demons and Satan and stuff came from, because these things look nothing like human beings. It's just sometimes things go wrong. And then women miscarry, or they have to have abortion to move them, or these things will kill them because they're messed up. Terrible pictures. And you say, is this human? Is this what you're talking about? It was always fascinating to me.
Sounds like that Verizon commercial. Got human? Got human?
Right.
Got human?
Right.
Can you hear me? Can you human me now?
Right.
Yeah, anyway, sorry.
But anyway, but yeah, about the time Jenny was born, I was starting being raised the way I was raised. Because you read as much as you can about a given issue. You don't just read your point of view, you read as much as you can. And which made me very unusual. I didn't realize until much later how unusual that was for anybody, left, right, center, doesn't matter. People just really don't look into all the information. They only look into that which supports them. And a lot of times that's, especially at that time when you're talking about these particular issues, you're talking about stuff that's very slanted. So I kept reading about how Margaret Sanger, stop me if I've already talked about these things, but I kept reading about how Margaret Sanger was pro-abortion and blah, blah, blah. And so I started reading Margaret Sanger. I started reading her books and found out that Margaret Sanger was a eugenicist, and she was actually vehemently opposed to abortion, which is why they didn't start the push to legalize abortion until after she died. Planned Parenthood didn't start the push to legalize abortion until after she had died because she opposed abortion. She thought it was immoral and she thought it was dangerous for women. So that was one thing that I was like, okay, that's a flat out untruth that I'm reading in all this right to life anti-abortion literature attacking Margaret Sanger. What they never mentioned was that she was a eugenicist, and her books were kind of shocking. They evolved. They started out basically, she talked about people like they were cattle. She's talking about Northern Europeans and Northern Italians and Southern Italians and blah, 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 and, blonde hair, blue-eyed versus, it's always blonde hair, blue-eyed versus dark hair, dark-eyed, whatever. There's always bigotry about that. That's always what it boils down to, as superior species versus inferior species. And I did a lot of reading about the Holocaust and eugenics and how Darwinism affected the whole thing. It kind of grew out of Darwinism because even in churches, the belief was, well, gee, if we evolve, then we need to take control of our evolution and make sure that we continue to evolve, that we're evolving in a positive way. And part of that was discussion about who was having children and who should not have children. And the thinking of the day was that, white people, white wasps, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants were, especially men, were pushing for white women to have more babies because the less desirable human beings were having too many children and we were going to get outnumbered. So
Eugenics. Yep, that's the
Right.
dark. That a lot of people who are progressives, such as me, and I'm assuming you would quantify yourself as that, don't realize that that's the darkest shadow in the progressive movement, which is that at the turn of the century, progressives thought, "Hey, let's embrace all these neat ideas that science has," and
It wasn't just liberals, though.
no, no,
It
no.
was conservatives leapt on that, and both liberals and conservatives passed laws allowing
Oh, absolutely.
people to be sterilized without their knowledge and consent, and that's still going on. I mean, we read about that the doctor in Georgia just recently who's been accused of sterilizing immigrants. Taking their uteruses out, performing hysterectomies and sterilization procedures without the knowledge and consent of the
Steve, yeah,
people.
you
They're
can.
just,
I'm pretty sure that probably came from Stephen Miller.
Oh, of course, he's a Jewish Nazi. I mean, what can you say? Margaret Sanger believes large portions of the population should be given the choice to be sterilized or isolate themselves from the people so they don't reproduce. And it was a huge list of people that she thought should be kept from reproducing because of genetic reasons, and they were alcoholics, or they used drugs, or she talked about feeble people, meaning anyone with Down syndrome or any kind of developmental disability. She thought that, basically anybody who's disabled should be allowed to reproduce because they'll pass that on. All of this is very flawed thinking, as we know now. Anyway, she and her lover, H.G. Wells, were both part of that movement. But she changed. Her thinking at first was, we need to restrict certain people reproducing for the sake of humanity, and for the benefit of the species. Gradually, she came to believe her own propaganda, and began to believe that women should just have the right to choose to control their own reproduction. That was an evolution for her. But it was not what she thought at first. And she was from a family of she was like the youngest of 13 kids, or I don't remember, maybe she was the oldest, but she was from a large family, Irish Catholic family. And she also had the false belief that women, as they had more children, produced less healthy babies, which seems to make sense if you're just observing it. But if you're talking about a woman from a poor family where they have no money, and she's having a child every year, so there's less food to eat while you're pregnant, and of course most mothers are going to feed the children before they feed themselves. So for reasons, children, by the time you get to the 6th or 7th or 12th child, that the children are less healthy and have more problems. It's because, and more of them die, and you have more miscarriages and other things. Yeah, there is some risk as women get older, but, I had 6 children and they were all really healthy because I was very careful about how I ate, what I ate, and everything else, what I did to my body while I was pregnant, because, I was aware that I was building a little human being inside of me, and I wanted to do everything I could to contribute to that little human being's, give them the best start I could in life. And if you're from a poor family and you don't know about all of these things that we know about now, about fetal development and so on, then, all you know is your children are hungry and you're feeding them and you're not eating as well as you should be, so the next baby you have is going to be underweight and have all kinds of health problems because and brain problems and neurological problems because you were not getting the nutrition you needed to feed that baby while you were pregnant. So there was a lot of flawed thinking that was going on. But the main point of this is I read that. I read The Release of Life Devoid of Value, which was a book that led to the cleaning out of, in Nazi Germany, I think people don't realize before the Holocaust, they cleaned out the mental institute. This was in the 30s. Before the Holocaust, before World War II, they cleaned out mental institutions. They cleaned out, they killed off World War I veterans. They just killed off, they just had this cold, horrible attitude, like Trump has, towards anybody who's not physically perfect or whatever, like he's physically perfect, right?
Right.
But he's not physically disabled. And you know how shocked and repulsed he is. He didn't want to see parades with veterans, amputees and so on. That's shocking and horrible to him. And that was their thinking, as these people are no longer useful to society, so they just killed them all. Based on this book, The Release of Life Devoid of Value, again, they had a whole laundry list of people that they felt were not contributing to society, so you should just euthanize them. Just kill them off, get rid of them, so we don't have to deal with them, we don't have to support them, whatever. That was really, I read a lot of original material from the 30s and 20s and stuff that shocked and really kind of damaged me and helped, and I ended up really depressed reading all this stuff. But the biggest depression was reading original material that anti-ERA, anti-abortion, etc., it's anti-feminist advocates were saying, and it's an echo chamber, and they all just repeat the propaganda everybody else is saying. Nobody has any original ideas, right? Including Phyllis Schlafly. She was the most original thinker in that group, and she wasn't coming up with anything original. Ironic as hell, because she was such a brilliant woman, and she formed this national movement that was highly successful, and yet she thought women should be home having babies. And, if a woman dies in abortion, dies during pregnancy, that's just God's will, I mean, even as a conservative religious political activist, the church's view at the time, I don't know what it is now, the Mormon church's view, was that there were mitigating circumstances under which abortion could be allowed. The life and health of the mother is among them. So, if it's a choice between aborting one of these monster fetuses that I mentioned earlier that looks like it was, boiled and then, dipped in lava or something, then, especially if the mother has other children, the mother's life is important, and you remove that fetus to save the life of the mother, right? Phyllis Schlafly and Catholics who think the way she does, conservatives who think the way she does, think that's just God's will. If she dies, so be it. That's what God wanted. I could never, ever in a million years believe that. That's just insane thinking, as far as I'm concerned. And a lot of that thinking and reading original material, John Wilkie, was that his name? Joe Wilkie, something like that. Anyway, people who think that way, reading their original material and what they actually thought, as opposed to the propaganda they were saying in public, like him saying, don't show people something that looks more like a shrimp than a human being. Reading all of that, plus reading what people like Margaret Sanger and so on actually thought. And there was plenty to criticize in her, but they weren't criticizing her for the things that I thought were legitimate criticisms. They were making up lies about what she did and what she believed. So that was very disillusioning to me. And when I realized, reading all of this stuff, what was actually going on and what the actual intention of all of this was, which was about keeping women controlled. And, of course, when Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell and those guys got involved, they got involved because they realized, hey, this is a gold mine. We can make a lot of money off of this.
And they still are.
And they still are. And that's exactly what we have going on right now with Trump and Graham Franklin and these people. It's about money. It's about money. They are not Christians. They do not care about God. This was not true of, it was certainly true of Jerry Falwell. Jerry Falwell was just, a freaking carnival barker. Pat Robertson actually believed his stuff, but he shocked the heck out of me. I watched his show and saw him. You see him on his show, and he probably hasn't done it in years because he's old and in poor health, but you'd see him on his show closing his eyes and holding a hand up and saying, somebody in Kansas has been cured of cancer. Somebody in Missouri has been cured of a brain tumor. Somebody, and he'd just say he'd just rattle off this stuff. And you know that poor people across the country think he's talking about them. So A, they're not getting treatment that they need. And B, they're sending him what little bit of money they have. And this guy is rich as Croesus and has had at the time like 5 swimming pools. I don't know what he has now, but he had a huge mansion with like 5 swimming pools and everything else, all financed by this con job he was doing. And I think he actually believes, to an extent, some of his religious BS, but he's still a con man. He's like Elmer Gantry. They all are, and Jerry Falwell was just purely a con man. Graham Franklin his name is Graham, right?
I think so.
I'm mixing up his name. Franklin Graham. It's Franklin Graham because his father was Billy Graham.
Yeah.
I swapped his names around. Franklin Graham.
I just call him Graham Spawn or Graham Cracker.
Yeah. Well, he's the one that my mother knew that family growing up.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, they're from the Grahams are from her neck of the woods.
No, that I knew. I knew because we lived in Charlotte for a while, and Billy Graham University was everywhere. But yeah, I did not know.
Her family knew his family, and he was known to be a problem child. Franklin Graham was a problem child. They felt sorry for the family for having to deal with him, and he's still a problem child. He's not a good person. He's taken his father's legacy, and his father had his problems too. He was not a flawless man, but he was a better man than Franklin Graham is. Franklin Graham is just a friggin' carnival barker. He's a con man. So, but yeah, when I was living in Wyoming, I was doing all this reading, and it caused me to become disillusioned and pull away. And then when I started to pull away, your father wanted to keep everything going, so he took over. And then we moved to Colorado, and I think in Colorado we weren't really involved. I still had the beliefs I had, but I was moving away, and especially with the problems that we were having in our marriage. And then the ward we moved to in Colorado broke my heart. They just broke my heart, because I have never dealt well with gossipy people. groups of gossipy people. My feeling when I was in high school and I ran into people like that was always, well, gee, I wonder what they're saying about me behind my back, when I'm not there. If they say that kind of thing about everybody else, what are they saying about me? Because obviously that's what they do. And that's the kind of ward we were in Denver, where they were just really gossipy, mean-spirited people. And I think I mentioned the primary presidency that I was in, and those horrible meetings we had where they'd talk about the bishop's wife. We got nothing done. We had a meeting every friggin' week, and every week it was just the primary president gossiping about and demeaning and talking about how much she hated the bishop's wife. And then she'd stand up in fast and testimony meeting and talk about how much she loved the bishop's wife. And
I do admit, every time you talk about the Colorado ward, which, full disclosure, I have a much different memory, but I was growing up, and their youth program was actually very strong. But every time you speak about the Relief Society there, which, by the way, is the name of the Mormon auxiliary female society, since women don't have the priesthood, every time you speak of them, I think about the women from the Music Man. With the chirpy song.
Pick a little, talk a little.
Yeah, exactly.
Pick a lot, talk a little. Yeah, pretty much. That's pretty much it. But, yeah, and this was primary, though. I was a counselor in the primary presidency.
So it's even more petty. It's like the junior leagues version.
Yeah, it's the children's organization. These are the people who... But every week we'd go to the primary president's house, and all of our children are in the basement, and you're all getting hungry, and it's getting dark outside, and we've been there for like 3.5, 4 hours while we accomplish nothing but her complaining about the bishop's wife, who I loved, by the way. She was one of the few people I really liked, because she wasn't that kind of person. She wasn't a big gossip, So I finally quit. And, she came to me all teary. She said, I know you're unhappy. I wish I could help you. And it's like, I couldn't even tell her. I couldn't tell. What am I going to tell her? Okay, well, I'm sick of the 4-hour gossip sessions at your house about the bishop's wife. And then you stand up at fast and testimony meeting and talk about how much you love the bishop's wife. And, I just remember sitting there thinking, we're all kidding ourselves. I have no doubt she stood up there in front of the church saying, I love the bishop's wife, and she totally felt inspired and believed everything she was saying. And I'm sitting there thinking, we're lying to ourselves. This is all BS, So I started to have, and at the same time I was having all the questions I had about religion, which I think we covered that, the infamous moment in the kitchen.
Actually, we did on the last iteration. That we haven't actually done that in this version, so we'll have to recover it.
Let me talk about that then, because that was a big turning point in my life. I went to your grandfather Artel and grandmother Fosha were hosting a Mormon.
Actually,
a couple of busfuls of Mormons.
I think that's actually large enough that. Let's put it this way. Do you want to keep going, or how long do you have?
No, we can talk about that on the next one. We'll save that for the next one.
I think,
then,
because 2 reasons. First of all, I remember the multiple times we talked about this that has, like, a lot of background to get there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because when you went on that trip, you'd gone to college, and there'd been that thing, and there was a lot of background that the last time we discussed it, I think, would help provide context for a lot of the things, and that so... Yeah, I think next time let's talk about early Colorado.
I mentioned the genealogy trip, right? That we took through the South.
Yeah, you highlighted it, but you didn't go into huge detail.
Okay. Well, the big thing that happened, I don't know if I can't remember what I've talked about and what I haven't.
I understand.
Especially since we covered it once and then some of the material was lost, so I don't know what I have and haven't said on this one.
I understand.
But we took that big genealogy trip because your father was interested in genealogy, which he still is. He's very involved in genealogy now, which is a worthwhile thing. His family, he felt like so much of his family genealogy was done that there was really nothing for him to do. So he was very interested in doing my genealogy. And some genealogy had been done by someone in our family, in my mother's family, and actually on my father's side too. Some of it's inaccurate, I have found. My mother always said, we're Welsh, we're from Wales. And I thought, the last thing I read most recently is the earliest Bergen here came in before the revolution. So, any Welshness is long gone. We're not really Welsh, but I didn't realize that until recently, just as I haven't realized a lot of things until recently about my family history. A lot of the word of mouth stuff is just simply not true. But,
are you telling me that the secret, the family secret about the Revolutionary War vigilante who dressed up as an owl at night and skulked around and attacked British soldiers is untrue?
Anyway, so we did this trip.
That's not a denial.
And we went to, I'm not even acknowledging you said that. So we went to Black Mountain and met a lot of the family there and talked about family history there. We visited cemeteries. We visited county courthouses and looked at records in county courthouses. We went there. We went to Virginia, where my father was born, Weiss County, Virginia. And looked at records there. We went to Kentucky and met my Aunt Ellen in Corbin, and we went to Hazard and visited. We met my uncle, Uncle Joe. Is that right? So one of the uncles that's really close in age to my father, which was really bizarre because my father was 5'5", and when I met my uncle, he was like closer to 5'11", 6 feet, maybe 6'1". I don't know. I don't remember. I just remember he was tall, and he and my father were spitting images of each other. They moved the same, they talked the same, they looked the same, except here was this tall guy who looked and sounded just like my father. It was really weird. And they both smoked, of course. Always had a cigarette in their hands. And I met my half-sister, Mary Ann. She's the only one of my siblings that I met. I have Claire and Ann and Jimmy. Apparently Jimmy's dead. But then when we visited my Aunt Ellen in Corbin, we had a long visit. She kept telling me how she had her grandmother's spinning wheel. Like I was supposed to be jealous about that or something. It's like, I know that's going to your daughters. I'm not an idiot. I didn't say that. But at one point, I kept talking about, I'd like to do this, but I'm too old for that. I was 31. And I kept saying that. And she finally looked at me. She finally looked at me and said, "How old are you?" So I'm 31. She said, "What are you talking about old for?" And so help me God, it changed my life. It really did. I thought, you know what? She's absolutely right, because she was probably in her late 70s or 80s then, and here I'm 31 talking about I'm too old to do this or that and the other thing. But that led to me eventually enrolling in college again and moving on to do other things with my life.
That is the first time I've ever heard that. That is the first time I've ever heard that story. Absolutely. I'm glad we had this discussion. You've never shared that story before, not once.
Okay, I thought I'd shared it a million times, but I guess not with you. But yeah, it had a very profound effect on me. It really did. It's a moment I'll never forget because, like several things that happened at that time, it was a huge life shift for me. Because it was like, yeah, I'm not too old for anything. I'm 31. I can do anything I want, and that led, among other things, to me going back to college. But we'll save that for the next thing because that's part of that whole thing.
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. Buy my book, Have Name Will Travel, at Amazon and other markets. RedAnvilCreative.com contains all our podcasts. Copyright 2020.
To fight the forces of evil!